Thank you all for being here and welcome you to Connecticut College. My name is John McKnight. I serve here as Dean of Institutional Equity and Inclusion. And it is really a pleasure to have you all join us for the first in a series on race that we are co-sponsoring with our friends at The Day in New London. My role tonight is to take a moment on behalf of the college to acknowledge the land we currently occupy and to honor the native peoples who were its first inhabitants. Specifically, we honor the Mashantucket Pequots, Eastern Pequots, Mohegans, and other tribal nations who are indigenous to Namiog, now called New London, and the land surrounding coastal Algonquin, also known as the Long Island Sound region. We appreciate their careful stewardship of the land over many generations and acknowledge the suffering endured through the historical period of settler colonialism. Finally, we express gratitude that these tribes remain as neighbors in the region, and we seek future opportunities for greater connection and partnership. Thank you. So we are simply delighted to welcome you once again to Connecticut College for this important conversation on race. There's at least one class of students who's looking at this topic very intensely, the class that I happen to be co-teaching, seated right down front, and I'm really... And I'm also thrilled to see so much of a turnout from our community. It's really a delight to have you here. At this time, I would like to present the president of Connecticut College, Katherine Bergeron, who will offer some remarks and introduce our speaker. President Bergeron joined Connecticut College as its 11th president in 2014. From her first year in office, she has supported the faculty in developing a bold new venture in interdisciplinary education. The resulting vision, called Connections, requires students to create deeper linkages between the work they do in courses, in jobs, and in the community around the globe, in order to prepare them for leadership in an era of change. Liberal arts for the interconnected world is what we believe in here at Connecticut College. Please join me in welcoming President Katherine Bergeron.
Good evening, everyone. I am thrilled to see you all here, thrilled to be here tonight and to welcome you to Connecticut College for this very special event with journalist Karen Florin and the Honorable Richard Robinson, Chief Justice of the Connecticut Supreme Court. Tonight is the inaugural event of what will be a series of dialogues that we are calling Conversations on Race. This is an important initiative that we're undertaking in partnership with New London's award-winning newspaper, The Day. It's an honor for the college, really, to be collaborating like this to advance a conversation on one of the most vital issues for our democracy, and to be working so closely with a 140-year-old institution in our city that represents a pillar of that democracy, a free and independent press. It's also, yes, you can clap for that. It is also, I might add, quite meaningful to note that the circle of collaborators in this effort extends beyond the one partnership, and I want to recognize and to thank both the Mashantucket Pequot Tribal Nation and the law firm of Sussman Shapiro for their support of tonight's talk. Now, when Tim Dwyer, The Day's new publisher, approached the college about the idea for this series, we were very eager to partner because what he described was so aligned with some work that we were already undertaking on our campus. In September, in fact, The Day published a piece about the opening convocation at Con, where I had announced a new initiative that our Dean of Institutional Equity and Inclusion, John McKnight, was launching in collaboration with a number of faculty and staff, an initiative that we are calling the Dialogue Project. The aim of the project is, in the simplest terms, to create the spaces for students and faculty to practice the art of expressing and respecting broadly divergent ideas and opinions. The program includes workshops, interactive classes, events on and off campus, and even lectures like these, where participants can learn to understand the positions from which they speak and be curious about and respectful of the positions of others, where they can learn to own their differences, where they can learn to listen deeply, where they can learn to find common ground. These are critical life skills that inform the best kind of leaders. You can think of it almost as a new kind of education in diplomacy and justice for the 21st century. And we are deeply moved that Agnes Gund, from the Connecticut College class of 1960 and President Emerita of the Museum of Modern Art, recently designated a $1 million gift to endow this program, which now bears her name in perpetuity. Why do we need to develop new capacities for dialogue? Because conversations on the most important things, the things that define our humanity and shape our communities, are difficult. Conversations about race are difficult. Conversations about privilege and power are difficult. Intergenerational conversations are difficult. That's exactly why we have to have them and keep having them so that we can create better and truer and more just communities. One of our students, Ketsi Singh Solo from the class of 2022, said this quite eloquently in an opinion piece that she recently wrote about racial inclusion for our campus paper. She wrote, "People of color on Connecticut College's campus don't need any more student organizations. We have discussed our issues, we have connected, and we have created a community within ourselves. All we need now is for everyone else to enter the group chat." I am so glad that so many of you, so many of you tonight have made the effort to be here in order to enter into this very promising group chat. So let me thank you all once again for being here. And as I do that, let me also welcome the publisher of our beloved paper, Tim Dwyer, to come forward to introduce our two illustrious speakers.
Thank you very much. Put my glasses on first. I'm a boomer. Thank you, President Bergeron, and thank you to the rest of the Connecticut College staff for your hard work in planning this event. This is the first of what we hope is a long-lasting community collaboration between Connecticut College and the day. I would also like to thank our two great sponsors for tonight's program, the Mashantucket Peacock Tribal Nation and Sussman Shapiro Attorneys at Law. I just want to mention briefly some background on the unique ownership of the day. We are a locally owned independent newspaper and media company. We are owned by a private trust. We donate our profits to the community through the Boat and Wine Foundation. Since the trust was founded, we have donated more than $12 million to the community. So when you support us, you support the community, not a collection of shareholders looking to get rich. And we need your support. That concludes the pandering portion of our program. I would like to welcome everyone and thank you for coming here tonight for this important discussion of race. It is a timely discussion because race inequality is and will continue to be one of the most critical issues of this century. We need no further proof of this than to look at what's going on in our country and the rest of the world. Across many Western democracies, including the United States, some leaders are calling for a full retreat from the rest of the world under the flag of nationalism. They are crying out for walls to be built under the guise of keeping our enemies beyond our borders. But the intent of those walls is to protect the status quo, to stop or turn back the clock on demographic trends as the country's historical, white and mostly male ruling class is shrinking steadily. Our country is built on the premise that all men and women, no matter their race, color, or creed, are created equal. But we all know that all men and women, regardless of their race, color, or creed, do not live equal lives. Tonight, we will engage in a candid and open dialogue about how to discuss race, implicit biases, and racial equity issues. Let me introduce our two distinguished guests. Chief Justice Richard A. Robinson, the first African American to head up the state's highest court and oversee its judicial branch. He has been talking about race his entire life. While growing up, his mother pleaded with him to remember Emmett Till, a 14-year-old Mississippi boy who was lynched for offending a white woman because he had a habit of challenging things that were unjust. The great-great-grandchild of slaves, Robinson was once called Little Black Sambo and has been mistaken for a shoplifter. He travels the state and country to talk about cultural competency, taking the approach that patience, listening, a bit of humor, and often food will help further the dialogue. Robinson served as president of the Stanford NAACP and chairman of the State Commission for Human Rights before he was nominated to the bench in 2000. Welcome, Justice Robinson. Reporter Karen Florin is celebrating her 25th year at the day this month. Congratulations, Karen. She has covered towns, police, casinos, and tribes and social services, but found her true love when she was assigned to the courts in 2006. In addition to reporting on the major trials that take place in the London area, she serves as the co-chair of the statewide Judicial Media Committee, which is made up of judges and journalists. She writes a weekly newsletter for the day called Legal Insider. I urge all of you to subscribe. And reports for the day's cold case podcast, Case Unsolved. She was named Journalist of the Year for 2018 by the New England Society of News Editors. In May of 2019, the New London County Bar Association honored her with the Liberty Bell Award for promoting a better understanding of the rule of law and greater respect for the courts. Thank you again for being here tonight. Let's get started. Karen?
Hello, New London. My work is basically done because we're here and we're talking, right?
That's right.
I need my notes. Reporters can't do anything without paper in front of them. Coming into tonight's event, we've already had a lot of conversations in the newsroom, in the community, in court, and not a few people, several people asked me, hey Florin, what makes you an expert on this topic? And I said, well, no, actually I'm not an expert. What I'm an expert at is finding experts. So Chief Justice Robinson has been nothing but accommodating, has not once said no to anything that we've asked of him. And I just want to thank you again for coming tonight.
Thanks for having me.
And clearly there's some interest in what you have to say here. So maybe we'll start like they do in court by qualifying you as an expert.
I'm not used to being on this end of that.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Justice Robinson.
I was born in Stanford. I am a boomer, but only at the tail end of being a boomer. I have two brothers. I'm the middle child, which explains a lot of my behaviors. Great family. My mom is alive. She's not well. Dad passed on a few years ago. One of the things I like to talk about my mother and father is my mother was 5'9" and my dad was 5'2". And so, and when I started dating, it caused some problems. But as I said, born and raised in Stanford. I went to law school, became a city attorney, first African-American city attorney for the city of Stanford. And it was great, and worked for a guy, little known now, named Daniel Malloy.
We heard of him.
But yeah, and he was the one who actually nominated me to the Supreme Court and to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. I had the luxury or the pleasure, sort of an odd history. I was originally nominated by a Republican. I was elevated to the appellate court by a Republican. I was put on the Supreme Court by a Democrat and the Chief Justice by a Democrat. So despite what you may feel about Connecticut politics, they're a lot less polarized than in most places in this country.
Thank you. We heard a couple of harrowing stories over dinner with Chief Justice that maybe he'll share with us in a little while, but here's another question that I got, and don't worry, folks that submitted questions, because I have them here and I'm ready to use them in a little while. Here's a question I got more than once also. Why are you guys even talking about race? Why is this necessary? One person told me, race is over.
I've heard that too. Unfortunately, it's not over. And if you look at what for the last 400 years in this country, we haven't talked about race. We haven't been comfortable about talking about race. Barack Obama became president of the United States, and a lot of folks thought that our racial problems would end with that. But as you can see, when he tried to talk about race, it was often a very uncomfortable situation for all Americans. So we need to talk about race. We need to have these conversations because, quite frankly, if we don't have them, then we stick with the stereotypes and the fear and those kinds of things, and we have to get past that. For this country to survive, we have to get past that.
So help us. It's really hard to talk about race, and sometimes we say things that hurt one another's feelings. I think I've heard you say something about the ouch moments. How do you get over those moments and keep talking rather than shutting down? And can you give us some examples?
Well, you have to look at the long-term goal. And what I've done with my friends is I've had the conversation with them to say we can have those oops and ouch moments because you're going to have them. We're human beings. One of the problems with race is there's this other thing that's going on, which is implicit bias. And I talk about that a lot. Implicit bias is you are associating things together. You have a lifetime of receiving images and sounds about other people. And you can consciously reject those things. But sometimes in your mind, you're putting them together and not knowing it. I wish I had brought the Stroop test and other tests like that. But I do this one thing where there's a picture of a snake, and it's what's called a king snake. Those of you from the South know what the king snake is. It's a banded snake, and it's red and black and yellow. But there's a coral snake, which is also red, black, and yellow. Now, if you were sitting on a rock and a snake comes from under the rock and it's about to bite you, you look down and you're trying to figure out whether this is a king snake or coral snake, there's an old saying, if it's red near black, you're okay, Jack. If it's red near yellow, if it's red near yellow, you're a deadly fellow. So if you're trying to figure out this rhyme while the snake is about to bite you, and the snake's biting you and you're going like, which one is it? Which one? And you say, oh, I'm feeling sleepy. It's the other one. It's the other one. That doesn't do you any good. So you look, you go snake, and you jump away. That's what I do. But when you're using your people assessments, that's not a good thing. I'm the Chief Justice of the Connecticut Supreme Court, yet when I walk down the street, even dressed like this, I hear car doors lock. And it's one of those moments where as a black man, you kind of go, it's happening again. And then you pick yourself up and you go on. But that's happening. That's the kind of thing we need to talk about. Why is that happening? Why are these associations in the back of our head? So with my friends, I'm open and honest about it. And there's some times where I kind of go oops and ouch and those things, and you have to permit that. You have to permit your friends, your associates, to make mistakes and get past those mistakes, or else the conversation is going to stop.
Is this a topic that we can joke about?
Humor is very dangerous. I would stay away from humor, especially with people you don't know well. And when you get it wrong, that's an open and ouch moment. But the problem with jokes is there's usually something that's not so funny about it. There's usually a stereotype behind that. And so when you're joking about it, it's like, haha, but you end up not feeling so good, after the joke is told.
One of the things that we are fascinated with, especially as journalists, is the constantly evolving language of race, right? So when, those boomers grew up, there were different words to describe the people that we now describe as African American or black, or lately I even hear black and brown people, right? Are you hearing that one?
Yes.
Is it okay for you to say to somebody, I'd rather be called, well, you'd probably rather be called Chief Justice or Rick, right? But, how can people feel free to actually bring this up? When I meet you, I kind of just want to meet you and not have to talk about our races.
Right. And we don't have to talk about that at first. We can wait until we're more comfortable with each other before we talk about that. And as far as what a person wants to be called, we just had Diversity Week with the Judicial Branch. We have it every year. And we have trainings for our employees in order to be able to deal with each other in a better way. And the reason why we do that is because in order to have true access to justice, you have to be culturally competent. You have to not step on people's toes. Because we actually did a study. It was about, I'm trying to think how many years ago it was. I have two of my external affairs people here. I guess about 15 years ago now, where we did a study. And people felt that the quality of justice differed by their age, by their race, by their gender, by their color, by their religion. So you had people coming into the court and thinking, my justice will be different from somebody else's justice. The problem with that is the judicial branch has no real power to enforce its edicts. We don't. The reason why people follow us is because they trust us. They trust us to do the right thing. When we slip up, believe me, it's big, and there's been some slip-ups in the past. But in order to get people to trust us, we have to be culturally competent and really understand how not to step on people's toes.
Black's okay, African American's okay,
Right.
black and brown.
It depends on who you're talking to. And so the best way, that's where I was going with the Diversity Week thing. We were talking about gender. And, it's a very tough thing because we're now seeing that gender isn't binary.
Yes.
Gender is a spectrum. So a person may want to be called he, she, or some other pronouns. So ask them, what's your gender preference? What's your word you want?
How soon after meeting somebody should we ask them that? I know a lot of people are now sort of putting a little tagline on their, when they sign off on a letter or an email or something that says pronouns,
Right.
he, him.
What's your pronoun? Mm-hmm.
And so I like that. It tells me where you're at. It tells me who you are. But
Yeah. Well,
how soon do we bring these things up, and how do we bring these
I
up?
think out of the blue is not a good idea. But if you're talking and the subject of race comes up, it's like, I prefer to be called black. What's your preference? It should be part of the conversation. But I can understand people not wanting to go there because you don't want to be seen as being a racist. You don't want to be seen as being insensitive. That's why that oops, ouch thing really comes in. If the person says, well, hey, look, I don't want to talk about that, then you can back off and you talk about something else. But eventually you'll become comfortable enough to talk to each other about these really critical things. With my close friend, the Prouses, we have some really deep conversations. They're white, they're blonde hair, blue eyes, and we travel with them. And during our travels, we take the opportunity to discuss things that may have happened. Let me give you an example. We went to this hotel, and the Prouses checked in. After that, during the check-in, they were asked to upgrade several times. And so this was New Orleans, and they ended up with this suite and, on Bourbon Street and the whole routine. When my wife and I walked up, we were just checked in, and we ended up all the way in the back of the hotel. Now, a lot of you may think that the clerk for them was white and the clerk for me was white. No, the clerk for them was white, the clerk for me was black. But remember I said about implicit biases? My belief is that she didn't think I could afford all these upgrades and things, so she never offered them to me. Now, it cost the hotel a lot of money because I would have liked the upgrade, but by then I was so angry that they didn't ask me, I didn't do it. So implicit bias isn't something that just white people have. It's something we all have. And so we actually had that conversation. I asked them, I said, did you see what happened? They said, what are you talking about? So I explained it. I said, you were given the opportunity to upgrade, we weren't. We ended up in the back of the hotel, you didn't. Why did that happen? And so was it race? Was it not race? Or was it bias? And we had this open, honest conversation. And I think it was wonderful.
And they were probably kind of embarrassed.
They were, but
And frustrated too, our
Sure.
friends are being, not treated equally,
Sure. There were a number of different incidents, and some of them weren't so great. My wife looks very biracial, and sometimes people have a very difficult time trying to determine what box she fits in, when most of us don't fit in any particular box. When you look at me, you say African American. Look at you, you say white. Little do you know that I have English ancestry, and actually my ancestors were slave owners. The black side of my family were slave owners. So there's all these surprises. But race is so difficult. And think about how we put people in these little categories when I honestly don't know what race is. When you think about it, is if you looked at my DNA, you could not see African American. If you look at me, you see my appearance. And so is race biological? Is race a social construct? Is it both? That's a conversation I'd like to have. But it's so important, yet no one can ever define what it is.
And I think a lot of this conversation also touches on several other things, right? Like culture, ethnicity. Of course, how many people are you overseeing in the judicial branch?
3,600.
So you've got, a lot of different people, a lot of different groups.
Yes.
When we write newspaper stories for the day, we are often making an effort to be colorblind, right? So I've covered entire trials of, white people, all white people, or white defendant, black lawyer, whatever. And never do I mention race in the whole entire series of stories,
Right.
No matter who's involved. And that, in a way, I feel is not quite, it doesn't quite feel right either, because I'm not really describing people, And you had said something in your interview earlier about, colorblind's not a good idea either. Could you
Right.
expound on that a little bit?
When I do presentations on cultural competency and implicit bias, one of the things I talk about is that you have to look at people. When we first see people, think of an iceberg. You see 10% of who they really are. You see what they look like. You may be able to tell gender, but as I already said, gender can be very complicated. It's a spectrum. It's not binary. You might be able to see color. You might be able to see religion. You can see some things about their socioeconomic status. But we're already making value decisions about these people based on this 10%. But the 90%, what you really need to know about them, about how they think, how they live, how they work, who they are, that's all below that waterline. And so if you think of people as icebergs, don't judge them on that top 10%. Because when you saw me walk on the stage, you saw a black man. And I want you to acknowledge that. You saw a black man. A really good-looking black man. But you saw a black man. And the reason why I'm saying you have to acknowledge that is because you need to know what you're doing with that information. If you don't know what you're doing with that information, then you could be making these leaps in association. You could be making these value judgments on me based on these stereotypes. And I'm not saying that you're racist. I'm saying that you have to be very careful about what's in the back of your mind. We judges, I'm thinking about judges at the moment, judges tend to do things sometimes with their gut. The problem is we aren't trained to use our guts, and our guts can be a sign that we're using implicit bias. So if I see a defendant and I'm setting bail, for example, and it's like, something about this guy makes me feel kind of squirrely. If I set a high bond on that person and they can't get out, the end result will be they'll have a longer sentence just because of that first association I made. Because every study shows that the length of time you will actually serve is dependent on that first time you set bond. So you have to make sure that you aren't putting bias into the situation. You have to start asking those questions. I actually had a young man before me once, African American, and I felt uncomfortable. There's something about it. He had done a sort of a knuckleheaded crime. It didn't hurt anybody, but it was kind of a stupid thing. And I was about to set a bond, and I realized something is making me uncomfortable. What is that? And so I'm asking questions, and then I realized I come from a nuclear family. My dad, my mom would have been at this courthouse, and I would have been telling the judge, please don't let me go home with these people. They're going to kill me. But this young man didn't have anybody there with him. And so I realized that was making me uncomfortable. So I said to myself, why aren't his parents here? I started asking the questions I need to ask to find out why his parents were. Turns out they were new immigrants. They didn't know the system. They didn't know how important it was for them to be there. And most of all, they didn't know what kind of trouble he was in. So I eventually had the family come down, and then I, quite frankly, was afraid to release them to him because they were like my parents. And it was like, I don't know if I should let this kid go home with them. So the prosecutor saw this too, and the prosecutor ended up offering him a pretrial diversionary program. So he didn't have to burn an AR. I heard from this family for years about how well this kid was doing. Imagine if I didn't do what I did.
What a great story. And AR, for everybody who doesn't follow the courts, accelerated rehabilitation, which is kind of like your chance, your get out of jail free card, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody gets one of them.
Right, but you want to save that for something special.
Can you talk a little bit more about the presentation that you do in the court system and beyond on cultural competency? Do you tailor it for individual audiences based on what they do?
I do.
What is it all about?
I do. Well, I told you some of it. I do a lot of training with implicit bias, along with Justice Maria Khan. And one of the first things we do is we stand on stage and we talk about a little bit about our backgrounds. And I say something obvious. I said, well, if you look at Justice Khan and you look at me, which one of us is from Africa? And everybody points at me. She's from Africa. She's Portuguese. She was born in Angola. And so I use that to show people how we make these really quick decisions about people. Mostly I do judge training, because think about how the courts used to be. They were this mysterious black box with a bunch of very homogenous looking people who were doing these really powerful things. Courts have changed a lot since then. We have a more diverse bench. We have a more diverse judiciary. Are we perfect? The answer to that is no. We do a lot of training. We will keep doing a lot of training. I heard a statement today about moving horizons. That's absolutely true. The truth of the matter is we will need this kind of training until the day we die. You just won't get it perfect. And that's one of the things I worry about. People say, well, when can we stop talking about this? When can we stop doing these trainings? The truth of it is never. We like to put things in groups. We like to associate things. We like to take shortcuts when we make decisions about people. It probably is, if you believe that in evolution, it probably is an evolutionary factor, because you had to really determine really quickly who was your enemy and who was not your enemy. Sort of like the snake thing. But now that's not our society. We live with each other. We interact with each other. We have court systems. We have police officers. We have all these things where people make these snap judgment decisions, sometimes on faulty information. And that's what my program is about. It's about getting you to slow your thinking down, get off of autopilot, really get the information you need to make those other decisions about people.
And what are some of the ways that you can get that information in a sort of efficient and safe way?
One of the things, if you're interested in implicit bias, I know implicit bias is controversial. There actually is something called Harvard Project Implicit, and if you just Google implicit bias, you'll see the test. And there's all kinds of tests about people's biases. There's short and tall, black, white, heavy, thin, all these things that you can try and see whether you are associating things together that you shouldn't be. It doesn't tell you that you're a bad person, doesn't tell you you're a good person. It just tells you your brain is doing something with information that you may not be aware of. And study after study after study shows that if you are made aware of that, then you can start working yourself to make the unconscious conscious and deal with it. You know, as a judge, I can start making those decisions about people who are not in nuclear families, or people who are don't look like me, or people who have a different religion. I can go, wait a minute, hold it. I'm feeling uncomfortable, why am I doing that? Feeling real comfortable, why am I doing that? I was hiring law clerks, and there was this one gentleman who came in, and he was kind of okay, and then he mentioned this one thing, and I loved him. He went to West Virginia University, which is the school I went to, so I was like, oh, he's perfect. Could have been a serial killer for all I know.
Let's go to some of the questions from the audience, because they are really good. These were submitted ahead of time, and then in a little while, we're also going to have some of you come down and ask some questions. This one is from Joanne Key, and she says, as you progress in your career and achieve desirable outcomes, you come under more scrutiny and criticism. Can you give some examples on how you are able to overcome the potential pitfalls when succeeding while Black?
So the toughest question first, huh?
I thought that was a good one. Thanks, Joanne.
It's a very good question, and it's a hard thing to do. When I was nominated to become a justice of the Supreme Court, Governor Malloy held a news conference, and one of the questions that the press asked was, Fleming Norcott was an African American, and Richard Robinson is an African American. Did that have something to do with his appointment? And I thought the governor handled it in an interesting way, in a way that I liked. He looked at me and said, "Isn't it your birthday?" And I said, "Yes. I've had this sort of freakish career where almost all my promotions were on my birthday." And he said, "How long have I known you?" And I said, "I think we met in either 71 or 72 in high school." He was the class president, athlete guy. I was the nerd. And then he said, "You went to law school, and I went to law school, and then I was on the Board of Finance, and you were my attorney." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "When I became the mayor of the city of Stamford, how many years were you the attorney then?" I said, "It was 4 years under your administration." So he looked at the reporter and said, "I've known this man longer than any of my other nominees. Why would you ask that question?" The reason why that stands out in my mind is because race became so important at that moment, and I'm trying to figure out why. Why was race so important? And I thought the governor handled it in a really good way. I picked this guy because I know him. He happens to be African American, and it helps me with my efforts to diversify the court, but I know him. So I've had a career where I was the first of a lot of things, and it would always point back to the racial issue. And the problem for me was, well, wait a minute, you're removing all my other qualifications and saying this is just because you're a black man. Also, actually, in the commentary section, I believe, of one of your articles, I was reading that, and people were saying I was unqualified to become Chief Justice. But I had a law degree. I was an attorney for 16 years. I was a Superior Court judge for 6 years. I was an appellate court judge for 7 years. And I was a Supreme Court justice for 5 years. So I had more experience than most people, more diverse experience, legal experience, and court experience than most people who were on the court. Yet I was questioned about that. So sometimes it gets you down. And I know with young people, it's so tiring. It really is. I was doing a presentation at, can I mention another school?
Of course.
I was doing a presentation at the University of New Haven, and an African-American young woman came up to me and she said, I'm so tired. I'm so tired of this fight. And I looked at her and I said, here's the thing though, you're always gonna be black. You always will have this fight. And I was saddened to have to tell her that, but I always will be black, and I always will have some of these issues. When I walk into a department store, I'm treated differently than when you walk into a department store. Sometimes I want to just shake the person and say, do you know who I am? And quite frankly, when I was a judge, there was a funny moment where a person sort of did something like that, and then she saw me on the bench in the robe, and it was like, so there are some humorous moments. But you can't change that. So the thing is, what can you do with that? What positive things you can make out of it? And that's what I've been doing with my career. I've been trying to get people to talk about these things and why it's this way. Because the thing I've always wondered is, what happens if the one person who could cure cancer is an inner city black kid who doesn't have a chance? You know, what happens? And so it's like, I don't want that to happen. I want people to have the chance for things. And it's not that I want to take something from somebody else. Equality is not a pie. We could all have have equality and it won't run out. So it's not like that pie where you start taking pieces out and there's nothing left. It's not that I want more rights than you. It's not that I want your rights. I just want an equal stance. I want to be at the table with you because I think we can both be better if I am.
Next question. There seems to be an increased fragility and sensitivity about this topic, which has caused some people to fear speaking freely, since it could cause a backlash or stereotyping of their views. How do we overcome this and have real public discourse? This is from Charles Coiro.
Charles, this is a really great question. And it's a very difficult question to answer because I'm a human being and there's times when somebody will say something that triggers me. And I want to respond in a way that's inappropriate for that moment. But I've realized that in order to have this continuing conversation, I have to sit back and listen. My fourth grade teacher, Janet Harris, said, there's a reason why we have we have one mouth and two ears. So you have to listen twice as carefully. And sometimes people say things out of ignorance. Sometimes they say because they have a strong belief in it. If I get triggered and don't have this conversation, a conversation is a dialogue, and you have to keep coming back and going forward. If you give up at the beginning of that dialogue, all's lost, and we won't make any advancements. And that's sort of the quagmire we're stuck in now. And we have to get past that. We have to think about it. The most segregated day of the week is Sunday. And our homes are really segregated. And I've made sure that for the sake of my kids and the sake of my own sanity and my wife's and everything else, that we actually have people who are of different religions over the house, of different, beliefs, of different color. And we go over other people's houses, and we make the conscious effort to do that. So you have to make this conscious effort to be uncomfortable. Race sometimes uncomfortable. I'm used to speaking to people. I'm used to speaking to, recently I did a presentation in Virginia with the Virginia judiciary. It was 400 judges, and they were all elected judges. And so I wanted to have a conversation about that. Well, how do you follow the rule of law when you're an elected judge? So I was having conversations with them. And it was in the South, and that was sort of in my mind too. But I sat down and I had conversations, and I had unbelievable conversations. And the people who came up to me after the presentation were the older white male judges. And I said, okay, this is interesting. I was able to find that place where they didn't feel that they were being talked down to. They didn't feel that they were being called racist. They didn't feel that they were being run out of the room. It takes an effort. You have to get out of your comfort zone.
So there's a program going on here in New London called Encountering Differences. And I know some of you are out there, and kind of prompted by some problems at athletic games. I guess that's, like, people are pretty intense at those games. Sure. And it's really as simple sometimes, I think, as going over to dinner, going and having dinner with, if you're white, going over to a black family's house, eating their food and hanging out.
Food works.
I think food works. So that's one thing I always say, and maybe it's tending to oversimplify, but once you get to know somebody, we have a great community of immigrants here in New London, and during all of this ICE stuff in the courthouse, and we're writing about it, but I'm going over and meeting people, and I'm talking to them, and I'm hearing about their food and their lives, and it's like, wait a minute, you're in Mars, like we're in New London, and is that oversimplifying though? Is it enough that we're hanging out together, spending time together, or are we still going to have, conflict?
You're still going to have conflict, but that's okay. I mean, the whole thing is, as I said, it's uncomfortable to do it sometimes, but until we start having these conversations, and you got to start out with the dinners and inviting people over your house and getting rid of some of those assumptions that you make. One of the things I talk about in my training is, let's say you have a law firm, and you're trying to figure out which one of these new attorneys are on the partnership track, and you love playing golf. You absolutely love golf. But one of your new associates happens to be a black female, and you go, you know what? She's not going to like golf. But the problem is, if that's your partnership track, if that's how you start to get to know your associates, and you don't invite that person because you're implicit bias, you think this black woman doesn't play golf. Now, you didn't exclude her because you were black, but you did. So you have to get past those things. You have to sort of get off this autopilot and realize how you start making these partnership tracks, how you hire people, how you associate with people, and try to figure out what you're doing. Why are you feeling uncomfortable and uncomfortable? And I think if you do that, if you get off of that autopilot, which is not easy, but if you get off that autopilot, you'll be able to make headway into those other situations.
So how long into the relationship do we start looking at one another as, not the other?
Right. I think it's like any other relationship. You know when you start feeling more comfortable with a person and when you don't. The thing is to get past that, this person's strange to me, I don't want to talk to this person, or this person's not going to like me, or the big one is, this person's going to think I'm racist. Because if that's where you're going to stop, you're never going to have that conversation. And as well as the other side too. As a black person, I have to sit there and go, okay, my instinct is saying that this person's not woke. This person doesn't understand me. This person is saying things that trigger me. If I stop there, I don't get anywhere either. And so we both have to sort of get uncomfortable, even though it's the R word.
Yeah. Okay. Audience question. What is the most pressing issue that is disproportionately affecting the minority population in the criminal justice system, and what can be done? No problem.
Well, one of the biggest problems is the prisoner industrial complex. The way we incarcerate people and the rates that we incarcerate people. I find it interesting when I'm having some of these difficult conversations, some will say, but blacks commit more crimes. And it's like, that's not true. If you think about where crime is enforced, it's enforced in urban areas. And so if you have people concentrated in one area and you're doing more enforcement there, you're going to have more arrests there. Then you have the implicit bias problem on top of that. I can remember as a kid, I was in the 0-1 groups, which is the honor groups when I was a kid. I was often the only African American in my class. So I had friends who were white when I was at school and friends who were black at home. And so I lived in these two different worlds. And I felt that I was too black to be white and too white to be black. I was sort of called, I was called Poindexter and names like that. But I didn't feel like I fit in either world, but I was communicating with both worlds. So, you know, this was the 60s and 70s, and people smoked herb, you know. So the black kids, when they would smoke marijuana, the cops would arrest them. When my white friends who were up in North Stamford, the cop would either tell them to stop or take them home. And so you had the same situation, but you had a different result. You now had this young black person who had a criminal record, which really would ruin the track that they were on. And you had this young white person who was, you know, sometimes kids cause problems. And I'm not saying the cop was racist, I'm saying the cop had biases. The cop was thinking that this person needs this kind of punishment and this person needs this kind of punishment. But think about what happens to society if you do that. You start incarcerating blacks at a higher rate than you do whites. And as I said, blacks tend to be in a more concentrated urban area. So the prison industrial complex is a huge thing. The other thing is that, remember I said about people started thinking that the quality of justice was different based on their race or their gender?
Yes.
So people would lose faith in our governmental institutions because of the way the institutions treated them, or that they perceived they were being treated. So those are real problems. That's really why I'm into doing this implicit bias training, to get people to understand that these problems exist and we need to get past this.
And as our first black Chief Justice, do people sort of expect you to fix it all pretty quickly, you know? Are you, I know that you talk about Justice Khan, you work with her together on some of these efforts. Can one man do that in one term? How are you setting the stage for it to continue?
Sometimes it's a burden that seems too heavy to bear. But I do know that I feel that I have a special responsibility. And what I try to do is get other people to understand that because I'm in this place and I can do these things, I need your help to make these changes. And I think that works. I think the culture of the branch is changing because now you have not only from the bottom up, from the employees and the employees of color and everything else saying, hey, look, we need to make changes here. But you have me on the top trying to do it from the top, and hopefully we'll meet in the middle and make these changes. And I think everybody's better off because of those changes. Because one of the problems with the perception now, and I think it's a very real issue that we need to deal with. White males feel they're being left out. They're feeling that they are losing that piece of the pie. And so it can't possibly be the way that we fix that is to ignore them. It can't possibly be the way to fix that is to not address their concerns. They have to be part of the conversation. And they're really important people to bring into the conversation. And sometimes it's difficult. But often, when I do my presentations, that person is my target, the person who's sitting there that person's my target. Because if I can't bring them in, I can't get things done.
Wow. That was a great question, A. Green. Next question. Why are so many okay with staying silent? Why are so many unwilling to recognize their implicit racism? Alex Wade.
I think that my first answer to that would be, I think a lot of people don't know that they have implicit bias, and they don't realize that they're racist because they're in a culture where this behavior is okay. It's only when you start getting out of that into other cultures that it becomes a problem for you. People tend to gravitate towards people who think like them. It's easy, it's comforting. One of the things I do when I hire term clerks is the first thing I tell them is, I don't want an echo chamber. I don't need people who think exactly like I do. You're no use to me if you think exactly like I do. Push back. Tell me I'm wrong when I'm wrong. My permanent clerk does that a little too much, but actually my permanent clerk is wonderful. I could not do my job with that. Plug for John Wiener. I could not do it without John Wiener. But it's very comforting to have people who think like you. And I think that's why we're having this polarization of society. People are sticking with people who think exactly like them. I'd much rather, and for the students here, I gotta tell you, this is going to be hard. One of the things about the school system, the university system, is you're here to hear ideas that are different from yours. You are here to be with cultures that are different from yours. You are here at this very critical point of your life to experience things that are unlike those things that happen in the comfort of your home. And that's tough. It's tough hearing a different idea, especially when you think that yours is right. And so when you hear this, when you see this strangeness, you can either run from it, you can embrace it, you can tolerate it, you can deal with it. I'm saying do something more towards the middle than the extreme. Hang out with people who are different from you. And I'm not just saying a different religion. I'm saying a different way of thinking. If you're progressive, find some conservative friends. It's tough. But one of the most pleasurable experiences I had as a judge, I hired a term clerk who was really conservative. And we had the best conversations that I could ever think of.
Now, at the end of those conversations, was that person more, were you meeting more in the middle on some issues, or did you still end up where you began, but getting along any better?
I think we both became more tolerant of each other's ideas, and it was amazing. I won't say his name, but he's a very successful appellate lawyer now, and I'm so proud of him. And we still have those difficult conversations, but it was rewarding. And not only did, and I feel that I did, not only did I change him, but he changed me, and it was for the best.
Excellent. Okay, next question. What would be the best way to create a dialogue to support all people? And that one's by Margaret Richards.
What's the best way? I think the best way is to not be phony. You can't turn off yourself. You need to be who you are. And the whole thing is, if you can do that and the other person can do that in the same space, you're both going to be better off. But you have to be tolerant. You have to be patient. You're not going to get this right at the first time you talk. You're not going to get this right the 25th time that you talk. You're going to work on that if it's a lifetime friend for a lifetime. But it's worth it.
And I think that's true of all sort of human interactions.
I agree.
Right?
Because if a relationship is worth it to you, you're going to work on that relationship. And so I'm saying that it's worth it to work with other people too.
Love it. Next question. Oh boy. How do we counter harmful social media? By Gabriella Schlesinger. Justice Robinson, are you on social media?
I keep thinking about the former Chief Justice when she found out that I had a Facebook account.
Oh!
I am on social media. I don't use it that much. Quite frankly, it does keep me in touch with family and friends, and a lot of you folks don't know, I'm a martial artist. I'm a 4th degree black belt. My wife is a 6th degree black belt. And she's my instructor. and people often ask, have we sparred? And we sparred twice, and you know what? Winning isn't everything.
So you are on social media.
I am on social media.
It's harmful. It's good and bad.
It can be, because when people feel that they have the shield of anonymity, they'll say things that they won't say otherwise. And then you have this whole troll phenomena, which I don't get, how people want to hurt somebody just because it's somehow fun to them. I'm not sure what you can do about social media except for regulate yourself and how you use it. One of the things that I found out, it was like there's this myth, and I do think it's a myth, that younger people are always more open to the things that we're talking about tonight. The young people are less racist. But I don't know if you've ever listened to, my son plays Xbox, and he plays these games, these open games where you have other people. And Jonathan, when he talks, he sounds like an educated person. And so he got into this conversation with these other people, and they started talking, saying some really horrendous things about black people. And John goes, well, you know I'm black, right? And they cursed him out. They called him a liar. It says, you don't talk like a black person. I'm not sure what that means, but so it's like when people are behind that curtain, they'll say some things that they normally wouldn't say. So social media is tricky.
I know, and a lot of people have said, well, especially in recent years with recent national events, well, at least we know how people really feel now, right?
See, I'm not sure if they really feel that way. I think that sometimes you put on a mask, you become this other person. It's almost like you're stripped of your, there's id ego and super ego. You're stripped of your super ego and you just become pure id. You become pure just hostile, and you get all this emotion out that you normally, that's not acceptable in society. So is that the real person, or is the person somewhere in the middle? I don't know.
That's
but
really
I think
interesting.
it can bring out the worst in people.
So interesting. Maybe they should take up martial arts. So we're going to have some questions from the audience for about 10, 15 minutes. If people want to come down to the microphones, or if they would rather us come to them with a microphone, they can signal. Yes, please.
Hi, thank you so much for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. Chief Justice Robinson, I'm wondering what you think about when we're having this conversation, how much of it gets lost when we have just a binary construction of race?
Yeah, as I was saying, I think a lot of it gets lost because one of the things I think we need to talk about, and I know this sounds like a crazy concept when you first hear it. What is race? We put so much into it, and when you see the extremes of it, when you see that a person doesn't look like you, me versus you, then you can put me into that box. You can put me into that African American box. But when you see somebody who looks more like my wife, who identifies as actually as Haitian American, it starts to fall apart. If you think about the fact that the way we use terms now about race and the way we construct race is actually from the 1920s eugenics movement, it's really scary. That's the same movement that was adopted by the Nazis, and they had 4 races of people. Now think about this. Do you see only 4 quote-unquote races of people? When I went to Asia, when I went to China, I got beat up in China too. I did martial arts in China. But I was at the Beijing train station, and the Beijing train station is probably about the size of New London. It's huge. And I was watching trains come from different parts of China. Now, I went to China with this bias that all Chinese people look alike. I will admit that I had this sort of a weird thought in my head. But when I was there, I saw people that varied so much. Just in China, I saw dark Chinese, light Chinese. I saw Chinese who looked like Native Americans. I saw Chinese that looked like Middle Easterners. You see all kinds of different people, and that started to make me think, what is race? Why are we putting people in these categories? And they fall apart. So when we have these conversations about race, I think we need to start thinking about, is race, does it really exist? Is it a social construct? I think it's more of a social construct than anything else. If we had a blood transfusion, I could give you my blood if we're the same blood type. You can give me your blood. There's very little difference between people. And so I think we need to start really thinking about that and thinking about our similarities more than our differences.
Thank you.
Next question, sir?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Justice, in our area, a very high percentage of all criminal trials involve minorities. I tried cases for 40 years, and I think I'm going to guess 70% of our trials involve minorities.
Okay.
Our jurors are never more than 5% minority. So that for a lawyer trying to find a jury of one's peers when you're representing a black man, I'm concerned about how we're going to explain to the housewife in Basra why my client, when he saw a cop walking down the street, turned and walked across the street. Is there anything that are we ever going to address the problem in our courts? Not just with minorities, but also with poor people. How many times I have wished that I could have a jury of my client's peers, people of average or low average income. But juror after juror has made up his mind, I can't afford this. I can't sit in this trial. And so I'm going to come up with some excuse to get me out. If he's arrested, he's guilty. Now I'm out, so I don't have to do it. People who would be good jurors, and I have asked from time to time for the court to order some additional payment to people who are in need, who can't sit on a jury because they can't afford to, which means we get retired housewives from Basra, much more than we get people from the streets of New London or Groton or Norwich. It seems to me it's a problem. It's been a problem for the 50 years that I've been practicing. Are we going to do anything about it? And are we aware of it? How do we document it?
We are aware of it, and we are going to do something about it. I have to be a little bit careful how I answer this question because there are 3 cases pending now dealing with Batson-type issues and dealing with the situation you're talking about. So I can't, as a justice, I can't talk about pending cases, so I have to be very careful about how I'm answering this. But I will tell you, we are addressing those kinds of issues. I will tell you that we've actually started adding, we changed our jury video, the introductory video, to start dealing with things like implicit bias. We are getting woke. It's taking time. You got to remember, the system stayed the same for a long time. It's just in the recent couple of decades that we started thinking about things and true access to justice. We actually have a panel now. We have a committee that really works on only access to justice. So we are making those steps. It's going to take a little bit for those changes to roll out, but I promise you those changes are being made.
Okay. 50 years ago, I said the same thing, Judge.
I just became Chief Justice last year.
Thank you.
Hello, Chief Justice Robinson. I have a question regarding a case that's actually going on, which is the civil rights of 1866 being dismantled into the Supreme Court with the Donald Trump.
The United States Supreme Court.
Yeah. What's your views on that, and what's your opinions about that, if you could?
The problem is I can't talk about any pending litigation, whether it's in my court or not in my court. I will tell you, am I concerned about civil rights in general? I was the president of the NAACP and all this other stuff. I'm always concerned about civil rights. I'm concerned about what's going on in our country now. Whenever we start to sort of shrink back on ourselves, we have these periods of, we start worrying about, no, we should be worried about the violation of civil rights. You know, there's a case called Korematsu. Remember that one? That's the case with the Japanese internment camps. How could that have happened in the United States of America? It was one of those periods. Are we in one of those periods now? Quite frankly, I think people need to stay woke and make that determination now. I often wonder how the country gets into these jams that it gets into. We were having a conversation earlier about we really need to know our history and make sure that it doesn't repeat itself again. We really need to be aware of our fears, because when we start fearing the unknown, whether the unknown is a person who is brown or a person who's perceived as an enemy for other reasons, whether it's their economic status or something like that, as a country, we need to really start becoming aware of that and see what we're doing. Because every time we do it, we say we'll never let it happen again, and we let it happen again. And so our history is very important.
Thank you for taking the time out.
Hi, thank you for being here, Chief Justice. My question is, it seems like in recent decades, sources of racial inequality in our society have become sort of more hidden from view. We don't have like explicit segregation, but we have sort of de facto segregation, like in like redlining and inequitable incarceration, and even just like not getting called back for a job interview if your name sounds, you know, like more like a minority's name. So my question is, how can we sort of make sure that these less subtle sources of racial inequality stay within the public discourse and aren't sort of hidden within the public narrative and get glossed over?
Well, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And so we all have an individual responsibility to do what we can to make sure that those things are changed. I'm out there teaching, doing programs about implicit bias. I'm trying to get to the people who normally wouldn't accept this kind of a thing. And I had to really figure out how to talk to people. When I first did it, I was losing part of the audience. So I said, okay, let me change this. And how I started figuring out how to change it was I had to start talking to those people who otherwise I might not have talked to. So what I'm saying is we all have a responsibility. What we've been doing for the last 400 years didn't work. So we need to start some other things. We've stayed in our little separate enclaves. You talked about redlining. If you looked at how the middle class was built, the middle class was built through things like the GI Bill, the Farm Bill. It was mortgages, things like that. But there's a book, and I'm not hawking a book, but a book that I read. It's called The Color of Law. And that book talks about how all these programs, how the government explicitly discriminated against other people. That actually built our society the way it is. It built the housing patterns that we have today. And so we have to get past all that. And the only way we can get past it is to learn our implicit biases and to deal with injustices when we see them on an individual basis.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm happy that you're here with us tonight. My question is, first of all, have you heard of the H.R. 1242, 400 Years of African American History Commission Act that was brought to the Congress floor in 2016, actually, and it was signed by Donald Trump in 2018. Have you heard of that?
No, I have not.
Okay, so this act was the act where they were saying that our history needs to be told truthfully, and that our history has been hidden for 400 years and beyond. I believe that a lot of racial inequities and a lot of racial questions could be answered better if people knew exactly who the so-called African Americans really are and know our history before we came to this country. And some of us were indigenous and some of us were indigenous in other places, and scattered to the four corners of the earth. So my question is, well, you know, I asked you if you heard of it, and you said that you haven't, and that is, like, you're a Supreme Court justice, and so, you know, it baffles me that so much information that we need to know, because so much of this information from this act is some of the reasons why some of the things that are going on right now are happening all over this country. And so if we don't get our history, and part of that 400 years, you know, I'm just going to say it right here, is that the 400 years pertains to the 400 years in the Bible, in Genesis 15 and 12, when he said that your people will be in a land and afflicted for 400 years. And so I know that it's a touchy subject, but that is who the so-called African, some of them, not everybody, but that is who the so-called African Americans are. And I think that education is key in order for everybody else to know who we are, and we weren't just picked up out of the jungle and brought here without an education. We were a nation of people. And we are in a nation, we're a nationality of people without a nation. And so we need to, for everybody, to be educated about who we really are, so that there won't be any, you know, like biases, or, you know, you're judging me because you think that I'm one person, but actually, you know, we've come from kingdoms. And so I'm, you know, an educator, and so I would love to educate our young people, our older people in our churches. Everybody needs to know who we are. And you said something about history. Everybody needs to know our true history. Thank you.
Hi.
Full disclosure, I'm a judicial branch employee. How effective is cultural competency within this agency?
I'm sorry.
How effective is it, the cultural competency training
Right.
within the judicial branch? How effective is it?
I think it's very effective. I've been asked to train judiciaries all over the country. And so when I'm not on the bench, I'm doing training. If you're going to ask, can you sort of just do a training and it'd be perfect and everybody will then understand each other and accept each other, that's not possible. Training has to be done on an ongoing basis, and it will always have to happen. I'm actually requiring more training, including not just cultural competency, but on gender bias, sexual harassment, all those things that really make a difference in this country. I'm making sure that the judicial branch employees know that I'm requiring it, that, including the managers, because I've understood that some people had problems saying managers weren't being trained, but I'm requiring everybody to be trained, and not just because there's a Connecticut general statute saying you need to train, you have to train people. I'm saying that in order for people to feel that the quality of justice is the same for everyone, we must have a culturally competent judiciary, and that's what I'm striving for.
So I might get in trouble for what I'm about to say. Just recently, had an incident happen at my job where one of my colleagues wore a Confederate flag shirt. So I made it, I didn't want to make an issue. I talked to the individual, told him how I felt, told my supervisors how I felt, and now they're telling me I can't talk about it because it's being investigated. Now I feel uncomfortable in my workplace about a situation that I felt I resolved by having a conversation with my coworker. What are we going to do about it? And this is in New London, just to make you aware, because I work in New London.
But the thing is, I can't comment on that because it is in the process of whatever's happening there. But I'm trying to make sure that those kinds of incidents don't happen. Now, am I going to be able to get that done tomorrow? No. It's going to take time. But I'm trying my best to make sure that incidents like that don't happen.
Good evening. I'm going to try to be quick. So I know you said you grew up here in Connecticut. You also went to school in West Virginia, and you've been traveling a lot. So I'm just wondering, do you notice any differences in terms of geographic racism stuff, like North versus South versus Midwest? Like, you know, I'm just curious. I'm from the South, so I'm just wondering.
Have I noticed a difference between the North and the South? The answer is yes. Because the thing is, I'm 61 years old, and I can remember driving south with my parents, and we'd take a couple of cars and we'd trail each other down. And the older folks in the audience will know what I'm talking about. But you pack a shoebox full of fried chicken and pound cake and tangerines, you know. And one of the reasons why we did that, you know, recently there was a movie called The Green Book. There were certain places that it was fine until you hit Maryland House. Maryland House is where the Mason-Dixon line. And once you passed that, you weren't sure of where you could stay. There were certain gas stations we knew that we could stop at and we'd be safe at. But even in some of those gas stations, because we were black, we weren't allowed to use the bathrooms. My parents actually would start talking different. They would start becoming a little more uncomfortable. They start becoming more protective, not letting us go away from the car. With me, I was sort of I didn't like injustice, and I would speak out. And you know, earlier you heard about my mother telling me about Emmett Till. My mother told me about Emmett Till when I was quite young. And she was always worried about me and my mouth and what I would say, because I didn't understand that I can get killed for confronting somebody who was doing something that I thought was wrong or unjust. So I did notice a difference between the North and the South. But another strange thing about that, though, was my wife and I traveled to the South after my youngest son was born. And we went to a motel. My mother was in the car with my brothers. We had two cars. And we had been driving most of the day. And so it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and my mother asked us to pull over, go find a motel and get some sleep. So we stopped at this motel in a little town, I won't say the name of the town, but a little town outside of Fayetteville, North Carolina. Sign said, open. We went to this little kiosk kind of a thing on the outside like they have in the South. And the person in there immediately said, we don't have any rooms available. The person behind us was a white man. That white man in front of us went to the kiosk and they gave him a room. So my wife, who had never experienced, her family's from Haiti, she had never experienced this kind of a problem before. She was outraged. And I said, I was with the NAACP then. I said, let me just make sure, I'll call the North Carolina president. We'll send some people on spotters down here to see whether something's going on here. In the meantime, we're going to Fayetteville. And she wanted to tell the guy off. I said, Nance, best case scenario, we go to jail. Worst case scenario, they never find us again. So we drove into Fayetteville, stopped at a motel in Fayetteville, get out of the car, guy had closed circuit television, and the guy looks at us and said, you from Connecticut? As an older white man. He said, you're from Connecticut? And I said, yeah. And he said, you drove all day? I said, yeah. He says, you must be tired. Here's the keys, gave us the rooms. He said, we'll talk about the bill tomorrow, and I'll leave the kitchen open late. So you had a white man treating us like dirt, and you had this other white man who was so hospitable you couldn't believe it. So the next morning we woke up, and we went to breakfast early, and the guy saw us. He said, well, no, I said I keep the kitchen late. He said, well, no, we're fine. So the waiter came over for service. It was my cousin. So it's not, what I'm trying to tell you is not just North or South, it's the people, it's the individual that you have to worry about. I've been treated well in the South, and I've been treated badly in the North. I've been treated well in the North, I've been treated badly in the South. It's the person you have to deal with.
Thank you.
All right, couple more, and then we're going to wrap it up. Hello.
My name is James Mosley, and what you're just discussing about driving through the South at different times.
Yes, sir.
I just turned 90 years old.
Wow.
On on August the 12th, and the girl that was here before mentioned about American history has not been told properly. I'm in the process of writing a book now on American history, and it's U.S. history told and untold. Quite a bit of it is not told. And I published one book so far, and this is Life Under the Microscope as an African American. And over my period of 90 years on this earth, I've seen a lot and heard a lot. And most people have heard about the synagogue in Pittsburgh. That was some of the people who were killed there.
Yes, sir.
I was born and grew up right in that area. And at the present time, that's what I'm doing, writing a book on American history. And another question I'd like to ask you is the Supreme Court case Shelby County versus Holder in 2013. Do you see anything coming as a result of that court decision by the Roberts Court? And also, there's a few other court cases. There was one particular as a result of the Brown case, Brown versus Holder, and I met Thurgood Marshall in Virginia at one time. It was right before he was writing the briefs for the Brown case, and at the time, in fact, it's in the book that I wrote here, and he was in Norfolk, Virginia at the time, and the Ku Klux Klan found out he was speaking down there, and he had to go to Lumberton, North Carolina, so they had to smuggle him out of there to prevent him from getting hurt and so forth. But again, like as I mentioned, when a few other speakers mentioned about race and how it's in the North and South and so forth, the last time I was in a military uniform traveling from California through the southern route, we couldn't stop anywhere. We couldn't stop at a motel, couldn't stop in a restaurant. I had 5 kids and a wife and a station wagon. We had to buy food and eat in the station wagon and sleep in the station wagon, and I was still in the military at the time. And so I went through quite a bit. And but the Shelby County versus Holder case really bothered me quite a bit, because Section 4 and Section 5 of that Voting Rights Act of 1965 was just obliterated. Okay. And there was no pre-clearance going back to the Justice Department and so forth. And I think, if I recall, no sooner than that case was decided in 2013, North Carolina and Texas start changing their voting laws.
Right.
And so,
right. The case you're talking about is the sort of the rolling back of the Voting Rights Act.
Right.
I am concerned about that, of course. Let me say it this way. I am worried about a more conservative United States Supreme Court, my own private interest. But as I see the rollbacks on the federal law, the thing is, we have the Connecticut Constitution. And we start to interpret the Connecticut Constitution. And the question is, will this court, my court, start filling in those gaps that are created in federal law? We all have to be vigilant, because we can do things in Connecticut, but our court can't affect things that happened in New Jersey or someplace else. So we all have to be vigilant. The other thing I want to say to you is, I want to thank you for doing what you're doing. There's an old African saying, which is, when we lose an older person, a library burns down, because you have all that wonderful knowledge, and thank you for passing that knowledge on.
All right, thank you. You want to give this to him?
I really hate to end the conversation. There will be a few moments with the Justice outside in a reception for those of you who have not had a chance to ask a question. I'm sure he'd be happy to engage with you directly. Can we just have another round of applause for both Karen and for Justice?